All right, let's get into it. Today, we're going to take a close look at the case against the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement. You've probably heard it called BDS. So here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start by defining what the BDS movement actually is. From there, we'll look at the core accusations it makes against Israel, and then we'll get into the counter-arguments to those charges. After that, we'll trace the movement's roots and wrap up with the argument that this is really an ideological war. Okay, first things first. What exactly is the BDS movement? Well, the name itself tells you a lot about its core tactics: boycott, divestment, and sanctions. The whole strategy is really designed to apply global pressure on Israel. We're talking economic, academic, and cultural pressure. Now, this quote from co-founder Omar Barghouti is really significant. Take a look. The focus here isn't on the 1967 borders, which you might expect. Instead, it's on the situation stemming all the way back to 1948, specifically what's called the right of return for Palestinian refugees. And this really sets up the core argument here, that the BDS movement isn't just a humanitarian campaign. It's being framed as a strategic war, one that's fought with non-military means. Okay, so let's dig into the claims themselves. What are the specific accusations that really fuel the BDS movement? The whole campaign is really built on a series of very severe accusations. The ones you see here are attributed to the movement's principal spokesperson, Omar Barghouti. Then you have statements like this one, from activist Asad Abu Khalil. The interpretation here is that the movement's ultimate goal isn't about reforming policy. It's about the dissolution of the State of Israel itself. All right, now let's pivot and look at the systematic rebuttals to those charges. Probably the most frequent charge you hear is apartheid. The counter-argument labels this the apartheid hoax, and it does so by drawing a really sharp contrast between the legal rights of Israeli Arab citizens and the situation for Black South Africans under that country's old apartheid regime. To back this up, here are some specific examples of the rights and positions held by Arab citizens within Israel. They have full voting rights, they can be elected to the Knesset, and they serve in high-level positions, even on the nation's Supreme Court. This next point is powerfully illustrated by a quote from Judge Richard Goldstone. And what's so significant about him is his background. He wasn't just a former South African Constitutional Court justice, he also led a major UN investigation into Israel. Now, on the charge of war crimes, this is where it gets really interesting. Judge Goldstone later wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post, and in it he actually walked back a key finding from his own UN report. He said that new information showed Israel did not have a policy of intentionally targeting civilians. So that brings up a big question. Where did this movement even come from? Well, its ideological roots go back decades, way before its official launch. This timeline connects three really key historical moments. You've got the 1948 Arab League boycott, then the controversial 1975 UN resolution that equated Zionism with racism, and finally, the 2001 UN conference in Durban. The argument here is that these aren't just isolated events. They actually form a single, continuous, strategic thread. And here's the crucial point about that conference. The strategy of isolating Israel, using language like apartheid state, was formalized right there in Durban. And this happened years before the official BDS call was even made in 2005. Okay, this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, framing BDS as a modern ideological war. So what does that mean, an ideological war? Well, in this kind of war, the main weapons aren't armies or tanks. They're disinformation and something called lawfare. The goal is to delegitimize a target, to frame it as a pariah state through media campaigns and constant legal challenges. So you might be wondering, where does the funding for a campaign like this come from? This table gives us a snapshot. It illustrates a flow of money, showing how European governmental and EU funds have been directed to non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that actively lead and promote the BDS campaign. It all builds to this final argument, that BDS isn't a grassroots peace movement that bubbled up from the ground. Instead, it's presented as a well-funded, top-down political campaign, a campaign with the ultimate goal of eliminating the state itself through relentless political and economic pressure. So all of this leaves us with a pretty provocative question to think about. At what point does political criticism cross the line and become an ideological war aimed at a nation's very existence?